Hi, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the room next door if you're in the dining room. Uh, I'm now going to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, Beaman Floyd. But before I do, I'm going to introduce him, but before he starts talking, we're going to play a short video from our major sponsor, Methodist Healthcare Ministries. As I said earlier, Methodist Healthcare Ministries is a longtime partner with this event, and we're grateful for their support. And they weren't able to send anyone in person this year because of COVID, but they've sent instead a video from their CEO, Jamie Weslowski, that we're going to play before Beaman starts talking. But as soon as the Methodist Healthcare Ministries video is over, Beaman is going to talk. And so I will introduce him now. Beaman Floyd, many of you know, also a longtime friend and collaborator with Texas Impact, but more recently, he's now the president of the board of the Texas Impact Foundation. He's going to give you an overview of public policy in Texas that's going to tie together all the threads that you've been hearing all day, or at least some of those threads, and give you a lot to chew on with your meal. Beaman is a lobbyist who works in a variety of policy areas, ranging from insurance, something that you heard about this afternoon, to public education, something that I think you're going to hear about from him in a little bit. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to first our Methodist Healthcare Ministries video, and then Beaman Floyd.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Weslowski. I'm the President and CEO of Methodist Healthcare Ministries. And it is my pleasure to welcome you this evening and to have Methodist Healthcare Ministries serve as a sponsor of tonight's dinner. I'd like to recognize our United Methodist women and all women of faith joining us tonight from all communities across the state. I would also like to recognize one of our longtime funded partners, Texas Impact, and its Executive Director, Bea Moorhead, and her staff for hosting this event each year, bringing everyone to our state capitol to learn, to pray, and to advocate for the freedom, justice, and opportunity for all God's children. Civic engagement is a powerful tool. Your presence here tonight as an attendee of the 35th Annual Texas United Women's Legislative Summit shows your commitment to address the concerns of your communities, and even more important, it shows your commitment to take action to bring about necessary change. Methodist Healthcare Ministries is equally committed to making a difference through public policy and advocacy. Our policy and advocacy team engages at the local, state, and federal levels, conducting research to provide the necessary data, drafting legislation to create new laws or amend current regulations that will improve the lives of our families, and yes, making those legislative visits at the state capitol. I've walked the Capitol halls and knocked on a few doors myself. It's not always easy to get their attention, but I can tell you that it's rewarding when your views are heard and people, our children, the elderly, working families, will be better off as a result of a new law, a program, or more funding. In your conference bags, you'll find a handout including a list of key legislative wins from our 87th legislative session. These are public policy initiatives brought forward by our board of directors to address access to care for working families, postpartum care for new moms, health literacy, behavioral health, broadband, food insecurity, and access to clean water. This past legislative session, we joined local officials, mental health providers, and families to secure full funding for a brand new state hospital in San Antonio. It serves families in 54 Texas counties. On behalf of Methodist Healthcare Ministries, I'd like to thank you for your commitment to addressing public issues and taking action to bring about change for our next generation. Enjoy your dinner this evening, your stay in Austin, and best of luck with your conference and legislative visits.
Hi, as B said, this is Beaman Floyd. Let me first apologize for not being with you all in person. I love this event. I really enjoy seeing you all on an annual basis. I had a surprise COVID positive test followed by an onset of COVID symptoms on Thursday night, and I am in a cabin way up in the woods, quarantining all by myself. And my poor wife is back in Austin, and the rest of the family, I have a gallon bag of red beans and rice and a lot of hot tea. So everything's going great up here, but I'm just very, very sorry that I can't be with you. Nonetheless, B did ask me to go ahead and talk to you all this evening. And hello to Kathy Herzog. I've got my chat up, so when you guys want to say something to me, I'll kind of try to spare an eye over there and be responsive to you. B asked me to talk about the state of the state and talk a little bit about synthesizing what you've heard so far today into something that's kind of cogent. And I've got to tell you, that's a challenge in a way. There are a couple of things that we know about Texas. It is a very huge state. We're approaching 30 million people. We've got a ginormous economy of which people are proud almost in an untoward way. We have a lot of different interests and a lot of different people and a lot of different needs and a lot of different challenges in our state that require a really broad view of what we're doing and how we do it. I will tell you that on the one hand, I am an optimist. I'm a lifelong Texan. I was born and raised in Austin. My family goes back a long way in Texas. And I think that Texas is going to recognize its complexity and its responsibility to its broad citizenry in a way that's important and in a way that will help us solve some real problems. I said will and not that we're doing it right now. I think that right now, whereas I'm sort of a medium to long-term optimist, I'm something of a short-term, it's hard for me even to say pessimist because it goes so against my nature, I think. But I do have some real concerns about what we're dealing with and how we're dealing with them in Texas today. That being said, I think that there is an enormous potential for good and a real basis for hope in what we're doing. It really starts in the room with y'all. The fact that you are here doing this work, giving your time and talents to this organization and listening to the policy issues that you've been hearing about today and yesterday and hopefully some tomorrow. This is important work, and what you're doing is extremely important work. And then delivering the fruits of that work to your elected officials, I will say without reservation, is more important than it has ever been the whole time I've been doing this kind of work. We all know what's going on with politics in Texas and in the United States. We have a very energetic style of politics. I certainly won't bore you with the details of it because there's an onslaught of description of those politics coming at you from a variety of sources all over the place. But I will highlight one really interesting thing about politics, and this is something that has bothered me more and more in the past few years, and that is the number of people who are ready and willing and able, if you will just vote them into office, to go and fight for you. That has become one of the key texts of election campaigns. I will fight for you. And sometimes it is people who are speaking into your policy positions and spaces and say they will go and fight for you for your policy positions. Often it's people who completely disagree with you 100%, telling somebody else that they're going to go fight for them, which I suppose means that they're going to be fighting you. The problem is the fighting part. The problem is that they're making a promise not to be peacemakers. They're making a promise not to collaborate. And that's a real problem. We're going to talk about that more and Josh is going to be talking about the importance of voting in elections and that kind of thing tomorrow. I think that's going to be really an important session, and Josh does a great job with that. But one of the things that I would say about modern politics is that its focus on fighting, whether it's people that agree with you or not, is counterproductive. That is not who we are. That is not who the Methodist women are. I know you all are passionate and you stand up for your principles, and I've seen you in your councils debate with one another, but I've never seen anything that I would describe as a fight. And I don't think that that's what we need from any elected official. I certainly don't think it should be the key promise that an elected official is making for you. The other thing that I've noted over the span of time that's really gotten to be an interesting thing is that there used to be, and I say this in a way that's quite critical. There used to be an idea that there was a difference between politics, or in a particular way, electioneering, election politics, and policy. And I'll tell you how that used to express itself to me. As a professional lobbyist, there were times when we would have very complex issues that would either not be popular with the voting, with an elected official, or with his voting populace, or it was just complicated, right? It was just hard to explain. And elected members would say things to me like, well, in the political campaign, it's sort of simple, and we're just telling people essentially things that we need to tell them in the election space, but after the election, we'll deal with the policy issue. And that's actually quite an indictment of the election process, right? Because what they're saying in essence is, it is not our job to educate the voters about policy in the context of elections. We just do what we have to do in elections, and then we'll deal with the actual policy stuff after the election. Now, this is not all members, but it was a statistically significant portion of members who would say things like this. And this is quite frustrating if you're a policy lobbyist, because you would say, well, why not talk about policy with your constituency in the course of the election? You'll look like a smart person if you do it. And the answer would be, well, our consultants or whomever are telling us that this is not a message that would sell. So you would have these two different kinds of time, right? You would have the election time where you said certain things, and then you would have after the election where you would say other things. Now, for good or ill, and I think sadly for ill is actual, those two times, those two different kinds of space have really been continually compressing into one space. One of the things that people who do what I do for a living now generally agree with when we articulate it so is, there is no such time as after the election anymore. Elections are always going on. It is a permanent cycle of election, right? And so if anybody tells you after the election it will be different, there is no after the election, because the next election is too close. And because even if there's not an election imminent, the sort of the ongoing buzz in the way we do media now means that you are constantly being reviewed as if you were in a critical election space. What that has meant up to this point is, in my opinion, a certain degradation of the policy conversation in a lot of instances, where you're trying to have a complex policy discussion with legislators, and they're really thinking in that consultant-driven election way, where they're saying, don't make it complicated, just tell me who the good guys are and who the bad, give me a message that sells. If you want this policy thing, don't ask me to sit down and digest this really complicated thing. Give me a message that sells. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm not talking about all members or even necessarily a majority of members. I'm talking about a critical number of legislators who are so in that space that it becomes more and more difficult to have a broad-ranging policy discussion. And when you marry that with this idea that they've been elected to fight, they've been elected to find the bad guy at the Capitol, this is not a good way to do complicated policy. So when I talk about complicated policy, I think that the text of this this event really illustrates that, right? I mean, just today, you've talked about methane gas, and you've talked about healthcare and climate, and you've talked about reinsurance, for crying out loud. And you've talked about a number of issues that on the one hand are somewhat disparate issues, but on the other hand, everybody has referred to everybody else, right? These things overlap and are tied together, and healthcare and technology and monetary policy and the chemistry of methane gas all overlap. They all basically flow into this policy stream, and they have an overlapping impact on the people of Texas. This is really important. This is an important thing to understand, because we don't have time to pick fights. This is too complicated. What we're doing is really important, and it requires real understanding and effort from elected officials, from constituents, from y'all, from me, from everybody who is engaged in this process. And let me be precise when I talk about not picking fights. I'm not talking about compromising principles, because principles are the bedrock of what we do, what you all do when you do your legislative formation. I've been privileged to be a moderator in a lot of your policy formation meetings over the years, and your principles are just vital. And you should defend those principles energetically. What I'm talking about is finding a bad guy and picking a fight, deciding that somebody is against you instead of being for your principles. We just don't have time. We don't have time for that kind of good guy, bad guy politics. We need collaborative, good, strong, sensible discussion in our politics. And I think if I can make, the first sort of macro point in this discussion, that's what you all need to demand from candidates for office. It's what you need to demand from the winners who get into office. It's what you need to constantly demand in your community. It's what you need to collaborate with your fellow citizens to make that demand an imperative for people who are running for office. They have to come to the Capitol to collaborate. They have to come to the Capitol to be willing to engage in really complex problems and learn, instead of coming to the Capitol to fight. You would not send a child to school and say, your number one priority when you get to school is to get in a fight with somebody. And you wouldn't expect them to, if that was their number one priority when they went to school, you wouldn't expect them to learn. These legislators, men and women, need to come to the Capitol and learn. And then they need to do with that knowledge by collaborating with their fellow legislators and solving problems. The second macro point I would make is that we are really at a point of extreme urgency with regard to the first point. And the reason we're at a point of urgency, in my opinion, is because we have been basically messing around with this sort of confrontational, conflict-oriented politics for long enough now. I would sort of chart it from about 2010 forward in terms of it really having a fundamental conflict that seems insoluble in our politics. We've been doing it long enough so that we are at a point where certain institutions are being threatened. And by institutions, I mean primarily those agencies in government, state government in general, has been under so much pressure for so long. It's been sort of a professional generation for 12 years, right? If you're counting by my logic, and I think longer than that in terms of the real strain of things. You've had very important institutions that have been under so much pressure that they've become everything from unattractive workplaces to places that have sort of lost institutional knowledge to the point where they're not sure they're not sure how to do their jobs anymore. This is really an acute issue, in my opinion. I used to have a French history professor whom I dearly loved. And one of the points that he would make is that if you bought a farm in France in 1750, you would fill out a bunch of papers and you would ultimately have a deed, and you would be able to go back to that farm in Brittany or wherever it was with relative certainty that you owned that farm, that you would go there, that you would work on it, that your labor was going to be worth it, because at the end of the day, when you made a harvest and took it for sale, it was your farm and your profits, right? Then he would say in 1850, if you were going to buy a farm in Brittany, you would essentially fill out the exact same papers with the very same institutions and have the same level of certainty that you owned that farm. Now, in that century, between 1750 and 1850, you know, lots of people got their heads cut off and Napoleon rose and fell, and there were just a tremendous, you know, political upheavals. But what kept France being the country that it was, the reason it survived so as a nation state, so that when I say France, we all know what I'm talking about, was this bureaucracy, this sort of general commitment to those institutions of government and those institutions of society that created a level of stability that made it so that the nation could survive its political excesses, even to the point of surviving revolution as a rather intact state. My concern about us right now is that we've got some really important institutions that are so under strain that I am very worried about their ability to keep moving forward viably. And when I say I'm talking about this as a big conversation. This is not Beaman Floyd in his isolated cabin dreaming this stuff up, right? I mean, this is in conversation with lots of other people who do what I do for a living and working in the spaces. It's a broad issue. I think you can, I think one of the ways you can look at it is through the lens of public education. Right now, we have a public education system that's really been under question and variously under assault since really the late 1990s, right? Where we went through the whole political statements about social promotion, and then we went through the high stakes testing, and then we went through the voucher, big attempts to have public school vouchers, and you all were quite engaged in this and had a very strong set of principles about that as long as I've known you, for sure. And then that sort of receded, but then you had budget cuts. You had significant budget cuts to pub ed in 2011. And then you had some budget replacement, but now you have the rise of the charter schools. And are they private schools or are they public schools, and how much of public school money is going to them? There's an answer to that question. About 14% of the public education budget goes to charter schools. They educate about 7% of the student population. And now you have this enormous change, right? This enormous thing that's happened with COVID and the hybridization of school and issues related to how the funding formulas work and how they work if you don't have kids actually physically going to school and what that might mean. You have an enormous pressure on the teacher population, right? Who has been working basically two jobs, as a remote teacher and as in-person teachers. And this I'm not guessing about because I live with a high school teacher, as many of you know. My wife, Carlin, has been teaching at Bowie High School for a long time. And I know both through her and through her peers, and then more generally through work with public education interests, that the workforce is exhausted. And the way we fund schools is quite strained and is trying to deal with this novel concept of the way we've had to do school through this pandemic in the last few years. And so my question would be, where is the great rallying cry from your policymakers to go in there and really help public education through these challenges? And the answer in many respects is the accusation that public schools are purveyors of pornography, with these big news stories and these sort of big political pushes about inappropriate reading materials in classrooms and libraries, even though that is really quite anecdotal. This huge issue, excuse me, this huge issue of critical race theory, which is very vague in its actual detail, and which, for the record, one of the courses that my wife teaches is ethnic studies at Bowie High School, and it's critical and wonderful, and she does a great job at it. And she is one of those people that they may be talking about, but they're really not getting it right when there's this extreme, wild, in my opinion, concern about critical race theory and teaching certain things in public schools. And there is this push for privatizing money in public schools, right? So we have this key institution that is extremely important to everybody in Texas, that involves hundreds of thousands of Texans as an employer, and millions of our children, right? Our most important and valuable resource, 4.5 million, 4 million to 4.5 million of our kids. And it's under this enormous strain. And in many respects, the policymakers' response to that has been this series of what I think are pretty clearly politically motivated attacks. And that is not okay. This is the time when the citizens of Texas should be demanding that policymakers get together and collaborate in defense of a very important system structure in this state. And instead, we're treating it as a political opportunity for division and to amp up and rally people to go to the polls and vote one way or another. And that's just not okay. What we need is more citizens like you who are willing to sit in rooms and get educated about how complicated systems and structures are in this state, and who can understand that broadband connectivity and climate justice and immigration policy and mental health and public health related issues and education all have multiple points of attachment and all need to be considered in a complex strategy for public policy. And we need to do something about it. Now, what I'm saying certainly could sound overwhelming because, well, one, it's overwhelming. And two, there are so many pieces to it that one person, one voter can't possibly know enough, have enough information about the entirety of the big picture of Texas to be able to wisely say, oh, wow, I understand all of it and can make perfect decisions regarding this entire complex structure. That is not true. It is also not true of any politician. So somebody saying to you, elect me because I have the answer and I can solve all the problems, without saying, because I'm going to go learn and listen and compromise and collaborate, right? We have to work together on these issues. They're way too big for any one person to completely understand, to master it, and to know. Everybody has to be open to learning. Everybody has to be open to collaboration and compromise. That has to be the core component of what we're looking for from each other as citizens, and certainly what we're looking for in representative leadership at the Capitol. And so I guess I would say, is this a pessimistic or an optimistic viewpoint that I'm presenting to you tonight Sunday, 7:01 p.m. At the UMW Conference 2022. And the answer is, I think it's optimistic, because I think the people of Texas generally have pretty good hearts. And what we prove it again and again when we find ourselves in a situation where we detach ourselves from this high energy adrenaline infused politics and just go to the, you know, helping hand neighbor stuff. We tend to be pretty good at that. We're just not hateful, violent people en masse in Texas. We just confuse the fact that politics, or we don't recognize the fact that politics is exactly the same as helping people out in your community. It's just on a bigger, more abstract scale. And so you all and other people like you and people who aren't like you, but who have that basic spark of human kindness and that basic spark of community decency and that basic desire to do something good, we need to find a way to basically re-infuse our politics with that spirit, instead of dividing politics out as something that is confrontational. It has to be community spirited. It has to be filled with peacemakers who yet stand with hard backbones up for their principles. A tension for sure, but it's a necessary tension in doing what we need to do. And we need to learn. We need to be unafraid of the complexity of the world. We need to be unafraid to listen to Paul Martin from the Reinsurance Association of America and say, wow, that guy actually has some important data on climate change, even though he's representing big, scary German corporations. And we have to really, in a spirit of cooperation and comradeship and love, get after these problems that we have, protect our institutions, and protect the great state of Texas. And that is what I have to say tonight. I have no idea how I'm going to field questions in this format. I think B may be with you all to field some questions, and I do have an eye on the chat, as I said, but and somebody says they're about to help me from Texas Impact. So I am ready to transition to question time.
I'll help.
Right now I'm hearing a wild feedback, and Ruth Bowen wants me to feel better soon. So I will do that for you, Ruth. Okay, I think we're working.
Did you guys try again?
Feel like we're in Stevie Wonder's music studio making a cool mix. Hey, if this will work, I don't know. I'm unmuted on my computer, but I'm muted up in my little box. Yeah, can you? I've got a couple of questions that I can go for in the box. Can you guys hear me? Michael Sharp says he can hear me. So we've got a couple of questions that I think are really interesting questions. The first one is, how do we convey what we just discussed to our legislators? Yeah, I think the answer to that is to demand that your conversations with your legislators be a little bit more complex. I think that one of the things that and I think part of what you can do is you can say certain things to them and ask them certain questions, right? What you can say to them is when they say, and I've been saying this for a few years now, when they say they want to fight for you, you can tell them, I don't want you to fight for me. I want you to learn for me. I want you to collaborate for me. I want you to represent me in an attempt to join other legislators and solve problems. And then I think you can ask them, you know, what are the areas that you feel like you need to learn the most in? What are areas that you feel like, where are places where you know you don't have the power as a fill in the blank, whatever the office is, right? Ask them about not how they're going to exercise power, but ask them about the limits of their power, right? And ask them to explain to you whether they really know what they're going up to Austin to do or not, and then lovingly help them understand what that might be. So I think just having a more complicated, deeper conversation with your legislators, instead of just having them say, here's what I'm going to do for, here's what I'm going to give you, here's what I'm going to do for you, would be a good way to get going. B is put on the BOA, so I think she means business. B, let me try muting and see if you can talk while I'm muted without the feedback.
Now try. Can you hear me? Oh man. Is that coming from purple? Hang on.
B,
Hang on. Can we acknowledge that this is an amazing time we're living in? Does somebody in the room have an actual question? The question is non-controversial. The questioner asks, she's concerned that we can't get qualified candidates to run for office. Say the last part. To get some of these people out of office.
Yeah, that is really a big deal. And you're putting your finger on the pulse of one of the issues that we see in my workspace all the time. One of the things I hear very frequently is who in the world would want to do that? Right? And what that means, though, is that the public is punishing candidates. And you all are the public. Right? So if you all are the public, you create the environment. Hey, B, give me the thumbs up if you guys can hear me. Okay, good. Yeah, if that you all are basically creating the public creates the environment in which these folks are operating. So the question is, who is actually creating this divisive, conflict-riddled political environment where no sane person would actually want to try to do any work? And the answer is us, right? Either by action or by inaction. We are allowing this environment to exist where reasonable people are brutally punished and unreasonable people are rewarded. And we have to change that. We have to change that with engagement. We have to change that with energy. We have to change that with being willing to go to the polls and vote, being willing to defend the right of other people to vote. I have said it before and I'll say it again with great confidence. Every crazy person in Texas is already voting. So every sane person who votes is actually an improvement. So get out there, and I know you all are doing it because you all are big old tall grass tops, and the fact that you're in this room means that you're engaged. But help your sane neighbors realize that now's not the time to give up. Now's the time to take control of this thing and figure it out. And that's a nonpartisan statement. I don't care what party somebody's in if they're a reasonable human being who's willing to listen to a good argument. And I've always said that, and will keep saying it. I don't care how much somebody agrees with me if they're unreasonable and unwilling to be a reasonable partner in public policy. I don't like them, even if they agree with me 100%, because they will, by definition, become ineffective. So, so engage yourself, engage your friends and neighbors, engage your congregations, engage whomever, not in a partisan way, but in a sane way. And we can make the actual culture of politics more sane than it is right now.
No, I don't think so. I just said, take another question from the chat.
Gotcha. Kathy asks, Kathy Herzog, my dear friend, says, so how do we know which politicians are telling us their true stands? Another outstanding question. The answer is by actually being involved in the policy process. Because if they tell you something and then they don't do it, and then you know and understand the policy process enough to understand that they're betraying the promise that they made to you, then you can create accountability for them. If they know you're watching, they're more likely to keep their promises, right? So I think that, but I think the biggest thing, Kathy, the biggest thing that I can say on this is if they're saying something publicly, if they're doing something in their campaign, if they say, for instance, I'm against vaccine mandates on their website and in their stump speech, and then they say to you, I'm really for vaccine mandates, but I just have to say that to get elected. Yeah, there's no way around that. It doesn't matter if they really don't believe it. If it's what they're doing, it's what they're doing. So I would, one, track them all the way through the policy process and hold them accountable if they're not doing what they said they would do. And that's just politics 101 from forever, right? But the second thing I would do is I would be really skeptical. Not really skeptical. I would say it's just a disqualification. Just DQ them. If they're saying, I'm saying one thing in one space, but I really don't mean it, and I'll sort of fix it in another space. That's living a double life, and that's not okay. And a lot of folks are doing it. Next question is, how do we get more women in government? The answer to that is see the previous question and the previous two questions, actually. One is you do candidate development, you encourage people to run. Second is make sure they're good women, because I was raised by two feminist moms, my mom and my stepmom, and I have 4 fantastic sisters, and I have 2 high-powered daughters, and I don't know nothing about boys anymore because I've been surrounded by women all my life. But there are good ones and bad ones, even amongst women. So don't just get women in government. I think we need more women in government, but get more quality women in government. I think it's really important. And there are a lot of quality women candidates out there that are not getting a chance. They're getting frozen out, both by the patriarchy and by bad women candidates. Don't be afraid to run a woman against a woman if one of the women is terrible at being a candidate. And don't be afraid to run a good man against a bad woman, because that's a thing too. So the answer is all of the above. Make politics more sane, develop really good women candidates, and then give them cover when they're in office by paying attention and by supporting them when they do right. And let's see, we've got something about, yeah.
Ask your question.
What is the process of developing candidates? Who do we partner with? What do we do to get these good women and good men to be?
So the question is, what's the process of developing good candidates?
Going to Josh's thing tomorrow is the most important thing. No, I mean, part of it is understanding elections, right? If you're gonna get a good candidate to run, you've got to understand some things, right? You've got to say, well, here's what it means to run. You know, that you file and that you know some basic things. The second thing you do is you basically get out there and talk to people who you think are good sitting legislators, and there are plenty of good sitting legislators out there. And you say, can you help us mentor somebody? Can you help us with this? You can also go, God forbid, and this I'm a little bit of a skeptic about both the Democrat and the Republican Party in Texas these days, because I think that they're so busy beating each other to death sometimes that they're missing the policy boat. But you can go to your more community spaces, like your county parties and your county political organizations, and just say, look, we want to get some good candidates in. Let's figure out how to do it, and get people to run. You don't have to run somebody for governor. Get them to run for county offices. Get them to run. Encourage them to run for school board and support them. Give them a chance to learn in that community space that's really direct with you. And then if they like what they're doing, if they feel like they can do more at the state level, get them into that space. But it's also, frankly, in my opinion, a lot of the very best legislators come out of city, local government subdivision space, because they know about making sure the lights come on and garbage gets picked up. And that's really valuable experience for going into state and federal government, frankly. And so I think that develop at the local level for local races, and just love on them, just love them. Give them support and encouragement. Don't get them elected and then just cut them loose to fend for themselves, just really be supportive, not only when they're trying to get into office, but once they get in office. It just means the world to members when they've got people in their community who really support them. I hope that makes sense. There's a fairly extended piece in the chat about charter schools, and I think it bears a little bit of comment. I will tell you that I think that there are a lot of critical questions to be asked about charter schools. I think that there's a sort of a corporate business model in charter schools that is really dissonant in our public school space. It involves, frankly, overworking their teachers, that they hire a lot of young teachers, and they come and they have them work these contracts where they're working 60 plus hours a week. They kind of burn them out, and then they go get new teachers. And I say that not as an indictment of all charter schools. Again, there are some charter schools who have done some great work in some really difficult spaces. But I think that there's a real issue in this sort of market share concept of charter schools out there trying to actually get the public school market share, where they're really working their labor to death. I think there's also the issue of resegregation that is in the comment on the chat. I think that that's absolutely true. It's interesting, right? Because part of what all public schools are supposed to take all comers, but there's definitely a filtering process in charter schools that is where they basically say, look, here's our contract, and if you don't like it, you shouldn't be coming to this school. And there's a version of self-selection in charter schools that is not in the normal public school. The normal public school does its duty and takes all comers. And though the charter school might claim that under the law, the actual process of intake from the self-selection of the people who want to go to the charter school to the rigor that the charter school creates in terms of getting into it, creates a selection that gives them a strange and unfair advantage and drains talent from the public school space. So I'm actually, I agree with everything that Mary Faye said in the chat, and would say, I think the charter schools generally, and those people who authorize them, up to and including Commissioner Morath of TEA, need to be asked and answer really hard questions about charter schools and what's going on in Texas with the proliferation of them at this point.
Okay. You had a question?
I wanted to ask you, what do you think is an important area that we as citizens want to help support things we should do right now to make a difference with what's being made for policy?
The question is sort of what's your wish list? What's the most important thing the United Methodist Women could be doing right now?
Engaging with legislators before, during, and after elections, and telling them that they need to collaborate with their fellow legislators to really solve problems. Quit feeding us cotton candy, and let's really get some good nutrition in our politics. And I just think that message is so important. I think that legislators, and it's a chicken or the egg problem, right? I always give this disclaimer, and I continue to give it. Almost all the legislators I know are really good people. I can count on, one hand. I can count on one hand the number of true live actual sociopaths that I've met that are legislators, people who are just really either just full on corrupt or are really trying to break something. I knew David Duke when he was an elected legislator, by the way. I worked in the Louisiana House of Representatives when he was a member, but and he's one of those five. But most of all of the legislators who get elected are actually trying to do something, solve a problem. And most of them are really kind of stick with that. And so they need engagement by people, and sometimes hard lessons from people like you all that say, don't give me this simple stuff. Don't tell me you're going to protect me from illegal immigrants, or don't tell me you're going to get me universal everything tomorrow. Don't say things to me that I know are unrealistic. I want to work hard, and I want you to work hard on complex issues. Get out there and engage them like the real life grownups that you are, and make them be the real life grownups that they can be. And don't let them just try to sell you something.
I think that is all the questions we have in the room. So if you want to take any more of the questions that you see in the chat, that's fine. And when you're done, then you can say you're done.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing in the chat is more real smart answers to the questions that people would be asking me than questions for me. I would recommend all y'all to the chat where it talks about the LBJ schools aid program, where it talks about the assessing the election ballot and their social media. Who are they tied to financially? That Trish Wimberly says. Yeah, use all your smarts on election stuff, and and there are a lot of resources out there. You all generate a lot of resources, and you share a lot of resources with each other. So I'm sad to say that like normal people of the world are going to have to basically rear up and demand more normal community-based behavior from legislators, less cable news and more community meeting type behavior. And it's not a quick fix. This is not a quick answer. We have become addicted to a very divisive and brutal news cycle, and we need to systematically seek treatment for that and go back to our real community values with each other. Like I said, I'm an optimist. I think we can do it. But it's going to require an untoward amount of work from a lot of us to get back or to get to a basic public policy space in our politics that's really healthy and can address our hard issues. So listen, I got to tell y'all, I appreciate your patience with my absence and this peculiar unsatisfying technological interface that we're having here instead of the actual getting to see y'all. I really miss you, and I'm sad to be participating in the COVID phenomenon in this way, but keep having a great conference, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.